Possums and ferrets are the main source of bovine tuberculosis in farmed cattle and deer herds in New Zealand. Around 70% of new herd infections in at-risk areas are due to contact with TB-infected wild animals. Although the Animal Health Board's objective is to control possums and ferrets to stop disease spreading, their work also contributes significantly to operations being carried out by the Department of Conservation and other agencies to protect native plants and animals.
The health of the bush is very close to my heart, and being able to go out and enjoy the birds, and probably can't hear it on camera, but they're all out there singing and going for it out there today. And seeing that the work that Doc is doing and that this program is contributing towards as well, the health of the bird life and so on in the forest, is a huge aspect of it that worries me, that if things go the wrong way with the 1080 debate and we lose that tool and there is not another one to replace it, which I don't think will happen unless they'll only get rid of it if there's something comes along that can achieve the same results. But if that did happen, if there was some idiotic decision made that control couldn't continue, what would happen to the bush and the native species that are in it? That really plays on my mind.
Yeah, we've got wood pigeons, we've got white-faced herons in the tree, we've got the wax eyes, we've got bellbirds, and we would have had very few native birds here, just the thrushes and the sparrows basically. So the effect that the possums have on the native species I think has probably been underestimated until you get a serious possum control program in place, and then you see how many more you have. One thing in particular that has been just very graphic in our area, back in the 70s, when there were was a lot of possums around, the ratas were dying. A lot of the ratas were dying here, and there was a story that the ratas have got a blight. There's some sort of blight come into the ratas, and the first 1080 operation in our area was on Innes's next door, and I remember Innes telling us, because he was a guy who'd ride around on his horse and he was observing his cattle. He'd go into the bush and he'd listen to the birds, and he was a real nature lover. And he said he went into the bush after the first 1080 drop, and he said it was almost quiet. And he said he went in there 6 months later, and he said he'd never heard so much noise with all the birds. And it only took 6 months. And then he said the next, probably about Christmas time, he said he was riding through the bush, and a lot of these ratas that he thought were dead were growing shoots. And the reason was the possums weren't chewing them to death. And while a lot of those rata trees were already dead, a lot of them weren't. And now we get displays of rata here that I have never seen in my lifetime. And my father used to talk about how the ratas, when he first came here in 1952, there was a lot of ratas around, and then obviously the influx of the possums has devastated them essentially in the first instance, but now they're coming back.
I often go for a walk in the bush now, and I met a hunter a week ago, and he's been coming here for years, and he just said he cannot believe there's just no possums. He's got a camp in the bush there, and he said you just can't find any possum shit anywhere. He said he wouldn't have believed, and he's been a hunter all his life, he wouldn't have believed the success that they've had. If you're working over next to the bush, the song life is just phenomenal. Yeah. And other people have remarked in some of my walks, when I meet people and they realise that it was aerial 1080, they just can't believe the difference between here and other areas.
I go out there now and are just astonished at the level of bird song and activity that's going on. And I mean, you can probably hear it in the garden at the moment. Our tui and bullbirds and all these sort of things that are floating around the garden, we never had that in the 80s. I mean, we grew, my wife's an extremely keen gardener, and we had roses being grown with electric fence to keep them out. Like sort of the other side of the coin, if you like.
The thing about New Zealand is it's described as the land without teeth. That means that we don't have any native mammals except for 2 tiny species of bats. So ever since people and all their mammalian pests arrived, the rats, the stoats, the cats, the weasels, the ferrets, you name it, it has caused absolute havoc for our native wildlife. And where we're not doing any pest control, we're really seriously losing The things that make New Zealand special and national identity hinges on having healthy forests and healthy wildlife like kiwi, like kokako, like kaka. And we know that where 1080 operations are done, that gives those animals a chance to breed and survive and thrive.
The difference in the bird life around here is absolutely fantastic. Since we've been here, it's gone from having bugger all to having heaps. There's up to 15 Canada in the garden. Yes. The tuis are flocking here now. There always used to be 10 in the cherry trees in the spring. Now there's 50s, and Rachel saw them this time, the first year, actually flocking. So the increase in the biodiversity is one of the side benefits we've got from fixing up the possums. The benefits to New Zealand's clean green biodiversity from having them all gone would be inestimate, it would be bloody hard to gauge. We show people one side of the river that's been blasted with 1080 for bovine TB control and bush control, and the other side that's had nothing done. On the heading north on this Whanganui River last year, on the right hand side, you couldn't count the ratas flowering. On the left hand side, you couldn't find one. So that's the difference between control and not control.
When we came to Taumarunui and started farming here, there were possums everywhere. You couldn't grow fruit, you couldn't. The roses but the bush was a grey mono colour. It looked like a black and white photo. It was just dead and dull.
I've seen apples, sitting on trees here in July. Whereas one time they'd eat the buds off the tree, they never even had apples on them.
The great thing about the Animal Health Board operations is that they actually support conservation outcomes as well as trying to achieve outcomes for TB eradication.
Together, the Department of Conservation and the Animal Health Board control introduced mammals on about 5 million hectares of public and private land. Without this work, many more of our native species risk going the same way as the huia.